3 years ago, I was standing in the MasterChef kitchen holding a golden trophy, tears streaming down my face as cameras flashed around me. The judges called my winning dish revolutionary, a deconstructed ramen that broke every rule in the book. What they didn't know was that this $1 million recipe was born from the most devastating betrayal of my life. You see, I should have been a culinary school dropout working double shifts at a greasy diner. I should have been forgotten, broken, defeated. Instead, I was America's newest culinary darling, all because my roommate, Chloe, tried to destroy me with a bowl of spoiled soup. It happened on the worst night of my life, the night before my final culinary school presentation. I'd spent 6 months perfecting my grandmother's secret ramen recipe, the one dish that connected me to her memory after she passed. Chloe knew this. She knew everything about me, my dreams, my fears, my financial struggles balancing 3 jobs just to stay afloat. She also knew I was sleeping with her ex-boyfriend, Marcus. What I didn't know was that she'd been planning my downfall for weeks. And what neither of us knew was that her act of sabotage wouldn't be an ending. It would be an ingredient. The key ingredient, in fact, to a future she could never have imagined for me. This isn't just a success story, it's a revenge story served piping hot. And it all started with a single spoiled bowl of soup. Life for me was a precarious balancing act. My alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. for my shift at the campus coffee shop, followed by 6 hours of classes at the Culinary Institute, then straight to a waitressing gig that didn't end until 11. Lather, rinse, repeat. Sleep was a luxury I traded for tuition payments. The only thing keeping me going was the simmering pot of my dreams, to graduate and open a tiny 10-seat ramen shop that would make my grandmother proud. Her recipe was my legacy. A rich, cloudy pork broth simmered for 18 hours, handmade noodles with the perfect chew, and a secret blend of aromatics she'd only ever shared with me. This recipe wasn't just my final project, worth a staggering 40% of my grade. It was the last piece of her I had left. It was everything. And then there was Chloe Morrison, my roommate, my polar opposite. While I was counting tips to make rent, Chloe was using Daddy's credit card to buy designer aprons she'd never get dirty. She glided through culinary school on a cloud of entitlement and feigned interest, her spot secured not by talent, but by a hefty donation from her father to the school's new West Wing. Another gastrique lecture, she'd groaned, tossing a $1,000 handbag onto our shared couch. Does Chef Dubois ever talk about anything else? It's so provincial. I'd just grunt in response, too busy kneading dough for my part-time bakery job to muster a real reply. We coexisted in a state of polite, thinly veiled resentment. I resented her privilege, and I'm not sure she thought about me enough to resent anything. I was just part of the scenery. That changed when Marcus Rivera came into the picture. He was a sous chef at Elon, one of the city's most pretentious Michelin-starred restaurants, and, until recently, Chloe's boyfriend. Their breakup had been a dramatic, public affair that she'd milked for sympathy for weeks. "I just don't understand," she'd sniffle, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes. "He said he needed to focus on his career, that he wasn't ready for my level of commitment." I'd offered clumsy pats on the back and murmured platitudes, all while a dirty little secret was buzzing in my pocket. A text from Marcus. "Thinking of you. Can't wait to see you tonight." It had started innocently enough. He'd come to pick up the last of his things from the apartment, and I was the only one home. He was charming, with a killer smile, and eyes that seemed to see right through the exhausted, flour-dusted facade to the ambitious girl underneath. He listened, really listened, when I talked about my grandmother's ramen. "That sounds incredible, Maya," he'd said, his voice low and serious. "A recipe like that, it's a story. You have to protect it." He understood. Unlike Chloe, who treated food like an accessory, Marcus saw it as a religion. We fell into a secret, frantic romance, stealing moments in the back alley behind my waitressing job or in his cramped apartment across town. It was thrilling and stupid and felt intensely real. He was my escape from the crushing weight of my life. The financial pressure was a constant, dull ache in my chest. My scholarship was conditional. One failed grade, one slip-up, and it was gone. I'd be out on the street, my dream evaporating like steam from a pot. This final project wasn't just about passing, it was about survival. The ramen had to be perfect. Absolutely, undeniably perfect. Making the magic broth tonight? Chloe asked breezily one evening, scrolling through her phone. She was lounging on the sofa in silk pajamas, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. Yeah, the final test run before the presentation tomorrow, I said, hoisting a massive stock pot onto the stove. My nerves were shot. My hands trembled as I arranged the pork bones, the charred onions, the kombu. Smells porky, she said, wrinkling her nose. Listen, I'm heading out for a bit. Spin class, then cocktails with the girls. Don't burn the place down. Wouldn't dream of it, I muttered. As the broth began its long, slow simmer, Marcus texted, My place. Now. My heart did a little flip. I shouldn't. I had to watch the broth, skim the fat, make sure the temperature was constant. But the thought of his arms around me, of an hour where I wasn't a stressed-out student or a tired waitress, was too tempting. It was a terrible idea. A reckless, irresponsible idea, which is why I did it. I'll only be gone for an hour or two, I told myself, a mantra of self-delusion. I turned the heat down to the lowest possible setting. The broth was barely whispering. It would be fine. When I tiptoed back into the apartment 3 hours later, flushed and giddy, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It was wrong. Not the rich, savory aroma of my grandmother's kitchen, but something sharp and acrid with a sour, chemical undertone. Panic seized me. Chloe was on the couch filing her nails. She looked up, a picture of innocence. Oh, hey, you were gone for a while. I was worried the soup might burn, so I gave it a little stir for you. Topped it off with some stock I found in the back of the fridge, too. It was getting a little low. My blood ran cold. What? What stock? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I rushed to the stove. The broth, which should have been a creamy, opaque white, was a murky, grayish brown. A greasy, rainbow-colored sheen floated on the surface. I dipped a spoon in and brought it to my nose. The smell was horrifying. It was spoiled. Not just spoiled, but contaminated. It smelled like sour milk and bleach. Chloe, I said, turning to face her, what did you do? What are you talking about? She asked, her eyes wide with fake concern. I was just helping. You know, that box of chicken stock in the pantry? The one behind the cleaning supplies? My eyes darted to the pantry. In the back, behind a bottle of all-purpose cleaner, was an ancient, puffed-up carton of chicken broth. It had probably been there since we moved in. I grabbed it. It was practically bursting at the seams. Then I saw it, the half-empty bottle of lemon-scented dish soap sitting next to where the broth had been. Oh my God, I breathed, the reality crashing down on me. I looked from the soap to the pot, then back to Chloe's perfectly composed face. Oh no, she gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth in a gesture of flawless theatricality. Did I grab the wrong one? Oh, Maya, I am so sorry. I must have been distracted. I was just trying to help. Her voice was dripping with a sympathy so counterfeit it made my skin crawl. This was no accident. The placement of the soap, the ancient broth, the fact she even touched my pot. A sacred rule we'd established on day one. She had done this on purpose. It was 2 a.m. The presentation was in 8 hours. My 18-hour broth, the heart and soul of my final grade, was a toxic chemical sludge. There was no time to start over, no time to fix it. She knew. She had waited for me to leave, waited for the perfect moment, and then she had systematically, deliberately destroyed me. I stared at her, the fake sympathy dripping from her like poison. The air crackled with the unspoken truth. You did this on purpose, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Chloe dropped the act. The manufactured concern melted away, replaced by a cold, hard smirk. Took you long enough. For supposed genius, you can be pretty dense. Why? The word came out choked. We weren't friends. Not really, but this was a level of cruelty I couldn't comprehend. Because I'm going to pass and you're going to have to beg Daddy to buy you a diploma? She let out a short, ugly laugh. Oh, please. This was never about school. Her eyes flickered with something dark and triumphant. This is about Marcus. My stomach plummeted. Marcus? What does he have to do with this? You two broke up months ago. Did we? She purred, standing up and stretching like a cat. She walked over to the counter and picked up her phone. With a few taps, she turned the screen towards me. It was a picture of her and Marcus, kissing. The photo was time-stamped, yesterday evening. While I was at my waitressing job, dreaming of a future he was helping me build, he was with her. We never broke up, you idiot, Chloe sneered, her voice laced with venom. It was all a game. We staged the whole thing. I wanted to see how far you'd go. The room started to spin. My legs felt weak. A game? A very entertaining one, she said, her smile widening. He'd come back here after being with you and tell me everything. How you talked about your poor, dead grandmother. How you cried about your scholarship. How you scribbled all your little secrets into that pathetic notebook. She gestured towards the small, oil-stained moleskin on my desk. My recipe Bible. The one filled with my grandmother's secrets, my own annotations, my dreams for the future. He was supposed to just get the ramen recipe for me, Chloe continued, her tone conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. I wanted a little variation from my own final project, but you were so easy, so desperate for a little attention. It became more fun to just let you fall in love with him. He's a very good actor, isn't he? Every word was a physical blow. The secret dates, the whispered promises, his admiration for my work. It was all a lie. A carefully constructed performance designed to rip my life's work out of my hands. He hadn't been my savior, he'd been her spy. He took pictures, Chloe said, swiping through her phone's gallery. She showed me page after page of my own handwriting, my grandmother's recipe photographed in stark detail. Every single page. He's been feeding me your ideas for weeks. My final project is going to be spectacular. A modernist take on a classic peasant dish, I'm calling it. I was going to be sick. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it felt like it was hollowing me out from the inside. They hadn't just stolen a recipe. They had stolen my grandmother's memory, twisted it into something ugly, and used my own heart as the weapon against me. I looked at the pot of ruined soup, then at the smug, victorious face of the girl who had orchestrated it all. At that moment, I didn't just feel defeated, I felt erased. I didn't sleep. I spent the remaining hours of the night in a frantic, tear-fueled haze, trying to salvage the unsalvageable. I dumped the toxic broth, scrubbed the pot until my knuckles were raw, and tried to create a new, express version of the soup. I used cheap bouillon cubes, scorched the aromatics in my haste, and boiled the pork bones with a desperate, furious energy. The resulting liquid was a pale, greasy caricature of my grandmother's recipe. It tasted of salt and desperation. Walking into the presentation hall was like walking to my own execution. The air was thick, with the scent of a dozen different culinary creations and the low hum of nervous energy. At the front of the room sat our instructors and two guest judges, a celebrated local chef and a notoriously harsh food critic. My name was called. I carried my bowl to the front, my hands shaking so badly that the sad, pathetic broth sloshed over the sides. I placed it before the judges. The silence was deafening. Chef Dubois, my primary instructor, dipped a spoon in. His face, normally stern but fair, tightened into a grimace. Maya, what is this? It's my grandmother's ramen, I stammered. The guest critic, a woman with a severe haircut and an even more severe expression, tasted it and actually shuddered. This broth is insipid. The noodles are overcooked. And the pork? Is this boiled? There is no depth, no complexity, there is no soul in this bowl. I stood there, mute and paralyzed, as they picked it apart. Public humiliation doesn't even begin to cover it. It felt like they were dissecting me, not the soup. I could feel every eye in the room on me, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I risked a glance at Chloe. She was watching me with a look of pure, unadulterated pleasure, a tiny smile playing on her lips. I failed. Of course, I failed. The grade was a 0. The scholarship was gone. My academic advisor pulled me aside after class, his expression weary. I'm sorry, Maya. We can't keep you on without the funding. You're officially withdrawn from the program. Just like that, it was over. My dream, incinerated. I tried calling Marcus. His number was disconnected. I was blocked on all his social media. He was a ghost, a phantom who had drifted into my life, torched it, and vanished without a trace. 2 days later, I saw Chloe's presentation photos on Instagram. She stood beaming next to a bowl of ramen that looked hauntingly familiar yet elevated. She'd used my grandmother's 18-hour broth technique, but served it in a minimalist hand-thrown ceramic bowl, garnished with micro cilantro and a single perfectly jammy sous vide egg. The judges were fawning over her. The caption read, "So proud to share my family's secret recipe for my final. Honored that the judges loved my modernist take on a classic. Culinary genius, nailed it." I threw my phone against the wall. Dropping out wasn't a choice, it was a consequence. My world shrank from the hallowed halls of the Culinary Institute to the greasy, linoleum-floored confines of Sal's Diner. It was the only place that would hire a culinary school dropout with no references and dead eyes. The diner was a relic, tucked away in a part of town that smelled perpetually of damp pavement and despair. My new home was a shoebox studio apartment directly above the diner. The rent was paid in docked wages, and the soundtrack to my life became the clatter of plates, the sizzle of the griddle, and the drunken arguments that spilled out of the bar next door at 2 a.m. Depression was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The joy I once found in cooking curdled into a chore. At the diner, I flipped greasy burgers and slopped out watery chili, my hands moving on autopilot. There was no passion, no creativity. Food was just fuel for people who didn't care what they were eating. And frankly, I didn't care either. My nights were spent scrolling, a masochistic ritual of watching Chloe's meteoric rise. She'd landed a prestigious internship at Elan, Marcus's restaurant. Her feed was a curated stream of success. Photos of her plating intricate desserts, selfies with celebrity chefs, posts about her upcoming feature in Food and Wine magazine. She was living my dream, a dream she had stolen and was now flaunting in my face. Every post was a fresh stab in a wound that refused to heal. I stopped talking to my friends from school. I was too ashamed. My world consisted of the diner, my grim little apartment, and the vast, empty space where my ambition used to be. I was 23 years old, and my life was already over. Big Sal Kowalski, the owner of the diner, was a man carved from granite and cynicism. A former Navy cook with arms like tree trunks and a permanent scowl etched onto his face, he ran his diner with military precision. He saw everything. "You're moping again, Chen," he grunted one afternoon, slamming a crate of onions down on the prep table next to me. "I'm not moping, I'm chopping," I said, not looking up. "You're chopping like you want the onions to kill you and put you out of your misery," he shot back. "You got the technique of a world-class chef and the enthusiasm of a corpse. What's your story?" I didn't want to tell him. I didn't want to tell anyone. But Sal had a way of wearing you down. He was relentless. So one slow Tuesday night, over a shared plate of burnt-end chili, I told him everything. The school, the recipe, Chloe, Marcus, the whole pathetic soap opera. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, my voice raw, he was silent for a long time. He just stared into his bowl of chili. "So you let some rich brat and her pretty boy boyfriend break you," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "I didn't let them—" "The hell you didn't," he cut me off, his voice a low growl. "They knocked you down, and you decided to stay there. You decided to live in the dirt because you think that's all you deserve now. Pathetic." Tears of anger and shame pricked my eyes. What would you know about it? He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw something beyond the gruff exterior. A flash of a shared, familiar pain. "I know more than you think," he said quietly. He got up, walked behind the counter, and pulled a dusty, framed photo from the wall. He wiped it with his apron and slid it across the table to me. It was a picture of a much younger Sal, skinny and angry-looking, wearing a pristine white apron with a logo on it. The MasterChef logo. My jaw dropped. You were on MasterChef?" "Season 2, he grunted. "Got kicked off in episode 4. They said I was too angry. Said my food had passion but no finesse. Said I didn't have the temperament to be a great chef." He tapped a finger on the picture. "The best dishes, kid, don't come from a fancy school. They come from the deepest hurt. They come from having something to prove. Pain is an ingredient. Anger is an ingredient. You're marinating in the good stuff right now. The question is, are you going to let it poison you, or are you going to cook with it? Sal's words echoed in my head for weeks. Pain is an ingredient. It sounded like something you'd read on an inspirational poster, but coming from a man who communicated primarily in grunts and scowls, it landed differently. He started pushing me, not gently. That burger you just made was technically perfect and emotionally bankrupt. He'd bark across the kitchen. Cook like you mean it, Chen. He'd leave obscure ingredients on my prep station, a gnarly knob of horseradish, a bunch of bitter dandelion greens. Make something with that, he'd order, something that doesn't taste like sadness. I resisted. I cooked his greasy diner food. I did my job, but the seed was planted. The change came, as it so often does, by accident. It was the peak of the lunch rush. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of sizzling bacon, shouting orders, and clanging pans. I was at the stove, stirring a massive pot of broth for the diner's sad version of noodle soup, which was basically ramen for people who had given up. A new busboy, a gangly teenager named Kevin, who had all the grace of a newborn giraffe, tripped over a floor mat. A full carton of milk he was carrying went flying, and a tidal wave of white arced through the air in what felt like slow motion. It landed with a sickening splat right in my pot of broth. "Oh, man, oh, geez, I'm so sorry, Maya," he stammered, his face bright red. "Idiot!" Sal bellowed from the grill. My first instinct was to dump the whole thing. It was ruined. 30 quarts of broth, contaminated with dairy, but we were slammed. We didn't have time to make more. "Just strain it out, Chen," Sal yelled. "The heat will kill whatever. Nobody will notice." Gritting my teeth, I ladled the broth through a fine mesh sieve, my frustration mounting. This was my life now, serving spoiled soup to unsuspecting customers. The irony was so thick I could taste it, and then I did. Before tossing the ruined batch, a flicker of something, curiosity, defiance, made me pause. I dipped a clean spoon into the pot. I smelled it. The aroma was different. The sourness from the milk had interacted with the salty, savory notes of the broth, creating something new. It wasn't just spoiled, it was complex. I hesitantly took a tiny sip. My eyes shot open. It was incredible. The milk, which had clearly been on the verge of turning, had undergone a rapid, high-heat fermentation in the hot broth. It hadn't just spoiled it. It had transformed it. It created a deep, funky, powerful umami flavor that was unlike anything I had ever tasted. It was the flavor of controlled rot, of decay. It was sharp and tangy and deeply, profoundly savory. I looked at the pot, then at Sal, who was watching me with a curious glint in his eye. A slow smile spread across my face for the first time in months. The accident that had ruined my life, Chloe's sabotage with spoiled ingredients, hadn't been the end. She thought she was destroying my soup, but she was just giving me a new recipe. "Sal," I said, my voice filled with a manic energy I hadn't felt in years, "I have an idea." The diner became my laboratory. After the last customer stumbled out and Sal locked the doors, my real work began. The sizzle of the griddle was replaced by the low hum of my quiet, obsessive experiments. I was a mad scientist of the culinary world, and my medium was decay. "Are you trying to poison someone or win a James Beard Award?" Sal grumbled one night, peering into a jar of what looked like black sludge. "It's fermented garlic," I said, not looking up from my notebook. "If I age it at exactly 140 degrees for 3 weeks, it turns sweet and molassesy. But if I introduce a specific strain of yeast on day 5, I was chasing the flavor I'd discovered in the spoiled milk incident. That lightning-in-a-bottle moment of transformation. I started with the basics. I fermented vegetables until they were tangy and effervescent. I aged meats in a temperature-controlled corner of the walk-in fridge, wrapping them in cheesecloth and whispering to them like they were my children. My Bible was no longer my grandmother's notebook, but a stack of chemistry textbooks and microbiology manuals I'd checked out from the public library. I learned about lactofermentation, about wild yeasts, about the complex dance of bacteria and enzymes that turns rot into radiance. Sal, for all his grumbling, was my willing guinea pig. He'd taste my concoctions, his face a mask of stoicism, and deliver his verdict in a single blunt sentence. Tastes like feet. Too much salt. Almost there. That last one was the highest praise I could hope for. He pushed me. He challenged me. He brought me a crate of nearly rotten peaches from the market. Make something out of this garbage, he'd ordered. I turned them into a sweet, funky, vinegary syrup that tasted like the ghost of a summer orchard. I was deconstructing flavor, breaking it down to its most basic, elemental parts, and rebuilding it into something new. My signature technique started to emerge: controlled decomposition. I wasn't just letting things rot. I was guiding the process, manipulating time and temperature and microbes to create flavors that were complex, unexpected, and intensely delicious. I was painting with mold and seasoning with time. I was cooking with the very thing that had destroyed me. You can't keep this to yourself, Sal said one night, after tasting a spoonful of my latest creation, a broth made from kombu that I'd aged for 6 months until it developed a flavor so deep and savory it was almost meaty. People need to taste this, people who aren't me. And where am I supposed to serve this? I scoffed. In the back alley? This isn't exactly diner food, Sal. No, he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. It's not. It's for the basement. The diner's basement was a damp, cavernous space filled with dusty relics from the diner's 50-year history. We spent a week clearing it out, stringing up bare Edison bulbs, and hauling in a few mismatched tables and chairs. We built a makeshift kitchen with a couple of induction burners and my growing collection of fermentation jars. It looked like a cross between a speakeasy and a doomsday prepper's bunker. We didn't advertise. We didn't create a website. Sal just made a few calls to some old contacts, line cooks, bartenders, food bloggers he knew from his past life. We called it Decay, a pop-up restaurant with no address and no menu. You texted a secret number, and if you were chosen, you got a time and a set of instructions. The first night, we served 10 people. I cooked a 5-course tasting menu centered on my fermented creations. They ate in hushed silence, their faces a mixture of confusion and wonder. Word spread like a virus. It was a secret, a culinary fight club. The mystery was part of the appeal. Then Janet Murphy showed up. She was the city's most influential and feared food critic, the same one who had publicly eviscerated my failed ramen presentation. I nearly had a heart attack when I saw her walk down the rickety basement stairs. Sal just gave me a nod. Cook for her, was all he said. I cooked with a fire I didn't know I possessed. I poured every ounce of my pain, my anger, and my newfound passion onto those plates. I didn't know her identity was hidden. I cooked for her as Chef Decay, a persona I'd created to shield myself. Her review came out 3 days later. It was cryptic and rapturous. She never named the restaurant or me. She just wrote, "Somewhere in the city's forgotten depths, a chef who calls themselves Decay is conducting a symphony of rot. They are not just cooking food, they are resurrecting it. It is the most challenging, terrifying, and brilliant food I have eaten in a decade. If you can find it, go. It will change the way you think about flavor." The review went viral. Our secret number was flooded with texts. Chef Decay became the biggest mystery in the city's food scene. The pop-up became the hottest ticket in town. We were booked out months in advance, with a waitlist in the thousands. For the first time in my life, I had money. Not just enough to survive, but enough to thrive. I quit my day shifts at the diner. I moved out of the shoebox apartment upstairs. I poured everything I had back into my craft, sourcing rare ingredients, buying better equipment, and pushing my experiments even further. It was during this time that I perfected my signature dish, my tribute, my revenge. I called it the deconstructed ramen of resilience. It had all the elements of my grandmother's recipe, but each one was twisted, transformed, reborn. The broth was a clear, intensely savory consommé made from my 6-month-aged kombu and fermented mushrooms. The pork was a paper-thin slice of salt-cured guanciale that melted on the tongue. The noodles were infused with bamboo charcoal, making them a stark, dramatic black. And the crowning glory, a single glistening egg yolk that had been cured in soy sauce and mirin until it was thick and jammy like a jewel. It was my story in a bowl. One night, a new reservation came in under a name I didn't recognize. I was in the zone, plating my ramen, when Sal came up to the pass. "You've got a guest," he said, his voice tight. "Table 4. I glanced through the pass-through window, and there he was, Marcus Rivera. He looked exactly the same. The charming smile, the perfectly styled hair. He was with a new girl, a pretty blonde. He was clearly trying to impress. My heart didn't leap. It didn't ache. It just went cold and still. He hadn't recognized my name on the reservation list, and he didn't recognize me now, a blur of motion in the dimly lit open kitchen. To him, I was just Chef Decay, the anonymous cook he'd heard about. I cooked for him. I poured all my cold, calculated fury into his bowl of ramen. I watched as he took his first bite. His eyes widened. He said something to his date, who nodded enthusiastically. He had no idea he was eating a dish born from the ashes of a life he'd helped burn down. Later in the evening, as I was cleaning my station, their voices drifted into the kitchen. The basement's acoustics were terrible, which for once worked in my favor. "This is incredible," his date was saying. "I've never tasted anything like it." Marcus let out a smug chuckle. "The chef is talented, I'll give them that. But this level of flavor, it reminds me of this one recipe I managed to acquire a few years back. It was this pathetic girl in culinary school, so naive. I got her to give up all her family secrets for a few sweet nothings." His date giggled. "You're terrible, Marcus." "Hey, all's fair in love and food," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Chloe and I got a great laugh out of it, and her final project was a huge success, thanks to my little reconnaissance mission. Some people are just stepping stones, you know? Chloe and I. He was still with her, of course he was. The girl he was with tonight was just another source, another naive stepping stone. A white-hot rage, pure and clean, burned away the last vestiges of my old self. The hurt, the sadness, the victimhood, it all evaporated. In its place was a singular, diamond-hard purpose. This wasn't over. He thought I was a forgotten, pathetic girl. Chloe thought she'd won. They were living a life built on my legacy, my pain. I looked at the reflection of Chef Decay in the polished steel of the countertop. The mysterious, celebrated chef. It wasn't enough. I didn't want to hide in a basement anymore. I wanted them to see me. I wanted the whole world to know what they did. I wiped my hands on my apron. "Sal," I said, my voice steady, "how do you audition for MasterChef?" The MasterChef audition was held in a cavernous convention center that buzzed with the desperate energy of thousands of hopeful home cooks. I stood out, and not in a good way. I wasn't a bubbly cupcake baker or a macho grill master. I was a quiet, intense diner cook with a story I wasn't sure how to tell. "And what's your name and your signature dish, darling?" a cheerful producer with a clipboard asked me. "Maya Chen, I'm a line cook. And this," I said, gesturing to the simple lidded bowl in front of me, "is a 73-hour fermented egg." She blinked. A what?" When my turn came to face the judges, the skepticism was palpable. Gordon Ramsay, the titan of televised culinary rage, stared at my humble offering with profound disdain. "So, you're a diner cook," he said, his tone suggesting I had just admitted to cooking with roadkill. "And you've brought us an egg." "A fermented egg," I corrected him calmly. I explained the process, how the egg was soft-boiled, then cured in a brine of soy, sake, and a secret blend of my own fermented mushrooms for exactly 73 hours, the point at which the yolk becomes a thick, savory, umami-rich custard and the white firms up into a delicate, jelly-like skin. The other judges exchanged wary glances. This was my gamble. It was the purest distillation of my new philosophy. It was weird, it was challenging, and it was either going to be a masterpiece or a disaster. Ramsay picked up his spoon and cracked the egg open. The dark, glistening yolk oozed out. He took a bite. His eyes closed. The kitchen was utterly silent. He chewed slowly, his expression unreadable. Then, his eyes snapped open and locked onto mine. "That," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, is either the most insane thing I have ever put in my mouth, or it is sheer, unadulterated genius. He took another bite. I haven't decided which yet. He pushed a white apron across the table. Get in that kitchen. But I'm warning you, diner girl, this competition will chew you up and spit you out if you don't have more than just trickery. I took the apron, my hand steady. Don't worry, chef, I said. I'm harder to chew than I look. Ramsay wasn't wrong. The MasterChef kitchen was a different beast. The early challenges were a brutal gauntlet of classical techniques I had never learned. Filleting a whole halibut in under 5 minutes, making a perfect 7-layer diplomat cake. My hands, so sure and steady when dealing with fermentation and controlled rot, fumbled with pastry bags and butcher's twine. The other contestants wrote me off immediately. I was the diner girl, the weirdo who talked to her food. They whispered in corners, their laughter barely concealed when my soufflé collapsed or my sauce broke. I survived by the skin of my teeth, my unique flavor profiles just enough to compensate for my technical shortcomings. I was always in the bottom 3, always on the verge of elimination. Then, in episode 3, the doors to the kitchen slid open for a surprise twist. Tonight, Ramsay announced with a devilish grin, we're giving 2 rejected chefs a second chance. Please welcome our wildcard entries. Out walked a burly grill cook from Texas and a smiling, confident woman in a designer chef's coat. It was Chloe. Time seemed to slow down. She beamed at the judges, waving to the other contestants. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a heart-stopping second, they passed right over me without a flicker of recognition. I had changed. The defeated, heartbroken girl she'd destroyed was gone. My hair was cut short and severe, my face was leaner, and my eyes held a cold fire she had never seen before. To her, I was just another competitor, the diner girl. The game had just changed. It happened during the first team challenge. We were split into 2 teams, red and blue, and tasked with catering a high society wedding. By some cruel twist of fate, Chloe and I were both assigned to the red team. I was put on the appetizer station, meticulously plating a delicate fermented beet and goat cheese terrine. Chloe was leading the fish course, barking orders with an air of unearned authority. We need more finesse on that plating, she snapped at a nervous-looking home cook from Ohio. This isn't a barn raising. She turned to grab a pan and her eyes landed on me. Really landed on me for the first time. I saw the gears turning in her head, the flash of confusion, the dawning horror, and finally, the slow, ugly curl of her lip as recognition set in. You, she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. What are you doing here? Same thing as you, I imagine, I said without looking up from my terrine. Cooking. This is a joke, she seethed. You couldn't handle culinary school. You washed out. You think you can handle this? I finally looked up and met her gaze. My voice was even and cold. I learned more from failure than you ever learned from daddy's money. Her face flushed with rage. I saw the old spark in her eye, the one that meant she was about to do something reckless. Throughout the challenge, I felt her eyes on me, watching, waiting. I knew what was coming. Sabotage was her only real skill. As service began, I moved to my sauce station. I had a complex, delicate sauce vierge that I'd infused with fermented tomato water. I turned my back for a split second to grab a fresh whisk. It was all the time she needed. When I turned back, she was walking away and I saw the telltale shimmer of white crystals dissolving into my sauce. Salt, the oldest trick in the book. She thought she had me, but she didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't panic. I didn't call her out. I simply tasted the sauce. It was a salt bomb, completely inedible. A younger Maya would have cried. A younger Maya would have been eliminated, but I wasn't the younger Maya. I looked at my station. I had my sauce. I had a tray of beautiful, paper-thin slices of raw scallops for the garnish. An idea, born from my late-night experiments in Sal's basement, sparked in my mind. 2 minutes to plating, Ramsay bellowed. With calm, deliberate movements, I poured the ruined, over-salted sauce into a shallow dish. I gently laid the raw scallop slices into the liquid, letting the intense salinity do its work. It was a flash cure, a rapid-fire ceviche. The salt was no longer a flaw, it was a tool. I plated my dish, The terrine, a few dots of herb oil, and then, fanned across the top, the glistening, salt-cured scallop slices. They were perfectly seasoned, their sweetness enhanced by the quick cure, their texture transformed from raw to delicately firm. When the judges tasted my dish, they were blown away. "Maya, the sauce is missing," one of the judges noted. "The sauce became the technique, chef," I explained. "It was a happy accident. I used it to cure the scallops at the last second." Ramsay's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with something that looked suspiciously like respect. Adaptation under pressure. That's the mark of a real chef. The scallops are divine. Smart thinking. Meanwhile, Chloe's dish was a disaster. She had been so focused on sabotaging me that she had overcooked her sea bass. The skin was burnt and the flesh was dry. "Chloe!" Ramsay roared, spitting her fish into a napkin. "While you were playing silly buggers, you forgot the first rule of cooking. Taste your food. This is dreadful. Get your apron and get out." As she walked past me, her face a mask of thunderous disbelief, she shot me a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over," she mouthed. I just smiled. "I know." The kitchen felt cavernous with only 6 of us left. The pressure was immense, a physical weight in the air. For the semifinal, the judges announced a challenge designed to break us. Recreate a dish from our past, a dish that tells the story of our culinary journey. My choice was instant. There was only one dish it could ever be. "I'm going to make my grandmother's ramen," I announced, my voice ringing with a confidence that felt earned. "But I'm going to make it my way, the way it was meant to be." A murmur went through the other contestants. Then, another voice cut through the air, slick and defiant. "What a coincidence," Chloe said, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "That's what I'm making too. It's an old family recipe." The judges looked from me to her, a flicker of confusion in their eyes. The other contestants just looked uncomfortable. Chloe was staring directly at me, a blatant challenge in her eyes. She was trying to claim my history, my grandmother's legacy, right here on national television. The nerve was breathtaking. Fine, let her try. We'd see whose story the bowl told. The cook-off was the most intense 90 minutes of my life. I moved with a focused calm, my hands preparing the elements of my deconstructed ramen of resilience. The aged kombu broth, the charcoal noodles, the soy-cured yolk. Every action was a tribute to the journey that had brought me here. Across the kitchen, Chloe was frantically trying to replicate the dish she had only ever stolen, never understood. She was using a pressure cooker to speed up her broth, a cheap imitation of the slow, patient process my grandmother had perfected. She kept glancing at my station, trying to copy my techniques. Halfway through, she saw her chance. A producer was interviewing her at her station, camera rolling. "It's just so disheartening," Chloe said, her voice catching with fake emotion as she looked directly into the camera. "To pour your heart and soul into a family recipe, only to see someone else, someone with less integrity, try to pass it off as their own." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Maya knows this is my recipe. She stole it from me back in culinary school." The entire kitchen went silent. The cameras swung to me. This was it, her final desperate gambit. I didn't get angry. I didn't yell. I just wiped my hands on my apron and looked straight into the lens. "She's right about one thing," I said, my voice clear and steady. "This story does start in culinary school. It starts with a pot of my grandmother's ramen the night before my final presentation." And I told them. I told them everything. The sabotage with the spoiled soup and cleaning chemicals, the fake breakup with Marcus, the stolen recipe notebook, the public humiliation and losing my scholarship, the greasy diner, Sal, the accident with the spoiled milk, the pop-up in the basement. I laid the entire, ugly, beautiful story bare for the world to see. When I finished, there was a stunned silence. Then, one of the other contestants, a quiet baker from the Midwest who Chloe had bullied in an earlier challenge, spoke up. "She's not lying. Chloe tried to switch my sugar with salt in the dessert challenge last week. I saw her." Another contestant nodded. "She's been cutting corners and stealing ideas the whole time." Just then, a producer stepped forward, speaking into Ramsay's earpiece. Ramsay listened, his expression growing darker and darker. We've just been doing a little fact-checking, Chloe, he said, his voice dangerously low. We called the Culinary Institute. They have a record of Maya Chen's final project, a ramen dish, and a record of her withdrawing the next day due to a failing grade on that project. They also have a record of your final project, a modernist ramen dish that received top marks. Funny that. Chloe's face went white. She was cornered, exposed, with nowhere left to run. The judgment was a formality. I presented my deconstructed ramen of resilience. The judges tasted it in reverent silence. Maya, one of them said, his eyes misty, this is more than a dish. This is a story. It's a story of pain and strength and transformation. It's one of the most profound things I have ever had the privilege of eating. Then came Chloe's turn. She presented her bowl. It looked pretty enough, a shallow imitation of the photos she'd seen on my pop-up secret Instagram tag. But the taste told the truth. Ramsay sipped the broth and slammed the spoon down. It's hollow. There's no depth. It's a pretty picture with no substance. You stole the notes, but you never, ever understood the music. She was eliminated in a blaze of glory, sputtering about conspiracies and unfairness, a furious, tear-streaked exit that would become an instant classic in MasterChef blooper reels. She claimed I got lucky. I knew better. Luck had nothing to do with it. I had made it to the finale. My opponent was James Park, a brilliant, technically flawless chef who had trained in the finest kitchens in France. He was precision. I was passion. It was the ultimate showdown. The finale was a 3-course meal representing our past, present, and future. James announced a technically dazzling menu of classic French cuisine. I knew I couldn't compete with him on that ground. I had to compete on my own. I had to tell my story. I called my menu The Alchemy of Betrayal. For my appetizer, representing my past, I served spoiled trust. It was a stunning, jewel-toned mosaic of fermented vegetables, beets that tasted of deep earth, carrots that fizzed with tangy sweetness, and radishes with a sharp, peppery bite. They were arranged around a dollop of black garlic aioli. It was beautiful, but it was made entirely of things that had been, by normal standards, spoiled. For my main course, my present, I served my signature dish, the deconstructed ramen of resilience. It was my anchor, my statement, the culmination of my journey so far. I plated it with more care and love than I ever had before. For my dessert, representing my future, I created sweet revenge. It was designed to look like a bowl of rotten fruit. A moldy raspberry was actually a white chocolate sphere, dusted with green matcha powder, filled with a liquid raspberry coulis. Decaying logs were actually rich, dark chocolate twigs filled with a fermented honey mousse. It was a visual trick, a final testament to the idea that the things that look broken can hold the most beautiful surprises. It was a risk, a final defiant act of culinary rebellion. As I put the final plate on the pass, I felt a sense of calm. I had cooked my heart out. I had told my truth. Whatever happened next, I had already won. The judges deliberated for what felt like an eternity. James's dishes were, by all accounts, perfect. His technique was flawless, his plating immaculate. He was a culinary machine. But food isn't just about perfection. James, Gordon Ramsay began, his voice filled with respect. Your skill is undeniable. Every dish was executed with the precision of a surgeon. It was a masterclass in French cuisine. He then turned to me. His eyes were softer than I had ever seen them. Maya, he said, your food is alive. It's emotional. It's challenging. You took us on a journey tonight. You cooked with your scars. And you showed us that from decay, something truly beautiful can grow. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was it. The winner of MasterChef, he boomed, his voice echoing through the studio. The chef who not only cooked a meal but changed the way we think about food is Maya. Confetti exploded from the ceiling. The other contestants mobbed me, lifting me onto their shoulders. I saw Sal in the audience, his gruff face broken by a huge, proud grin, tears streaming down his cheeks. I held the golden trophy aloft, my own tears flowing freely, the flashes of the cameras blurring into a single brilliant light. In my victory speech, I didn't thank the judges or the network. I thanked my grandmother for the legacy she'd given me. I thanked Sal for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. And then I looked straight into the camera. 3 years ago, a terrible thing happened to me, I said, my voice shaking but strong. And for a long time, I thought it was the end of my story. But now I know. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever could. Don't ever be afraid of the rot. That's where the magic is. I didn't open a tiny 10-seat ramen shop. With the $250,000 prize money and a cookbook deal in hand, Sal and I went bigger. We opened Decay in a sleek, minimalist space downtown. It wasn't a secret basement anymore. It was a destination. Within a year, we had our first Michelin star. My cookbook, Cooking with Scars, became a national bestseller. Sal, my gruff mentor, was now my business partner and the unflappable head of operations, the granite anchor to my wild, creative storm. Life was good. It was surreal. It was everything I had never dared to dream of. One afternoon, Sal came into my office holding a resume. He had a strange look on his face. "You're not going to believe this," he said, dropping it on my desk. An application came in for a dishwasher position. I picked it up. The name was fake, Cindy Morgan, but the work history was telling. A series of short-lived stints at chain restaurants, a firing from Elan for creative differences. I later learned she was caught stealing from the till. And a long, gaping hole of unemployment. I flipped to the second page. Stapled to the back was a grainy, wallet-sized photo. It was Chloe. Her hair was limp, the designer clothes were gone, and the arrogant fire in her eyes had been replaced by a dull, desperate haze. "Throw it out," Sal grunted. "She doesn't deserve to wash dishes in your shadow." I looked at the picture for a long time. I thought about the girl on the couch with the fake sympathy. I thought about the spoiled soup. I thought about the cold, hard satisfaction of watching her get eliminated. And then I thought about the girl in the photo, who looked just as broken as I had once felt. "Hire her," I said quietly. Sal stared at me. "Are you crazy?" "Everyone deserves a chance to start over," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. Even her. Chloe took the job. She never looked me in the eye. She scrubbed pots in the back of my Michelin-starred restaurant, a ghost from a past life. Maybe one day she'd learn something. Maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. Her story was no longer intertwined with mine. My revenge wasn't in her punishment. It was in my own success. It was in my peace. The real victory wasn't the trophy or the restaurant or the money. It was reconnecting with my grandmother's memory, not by preserving her recipe in amber, but by allowing it to evolve, to change, to become something new, just as I had. The betrayal hadn't destroyed her legacy. It had forced me to truly make it my own. It taught me a resilience I never knew I had, a strength forged in the fires of humiliation. On Tuesdays, when Decay is closed, I teach a free cooking class in the restaurant's kitchen. It's for culinary school dropouts, for diner cooks, for people who have failed, for people who have been told they're not good enough. I teach them how to find flavor in the things everyone else throws away. Don't be afraid of the ugly bits, I tell them, holding up a gnarled, forgotten parsnip. Don't be afraid of the funk, the sour, the rot. That's where the character is. People will tell you there's only one way to do things, one recipe for success. They're wrong. I smile, looking at the hopeful, scarred, determined faces in front of me, seeing my own reflection. The secret ingredient, I tell them, is surviving what breaks you.